Hi there. This presentation has been greatly inspired by the work of Thomas Keating and his work on the centering prayer and the philosophy associated with the practice. I must say it's pretty good because, he's popularizing or attempting to popularize Christian mysticism and to restore Christianity to its original Western mystery school or Western mystery system that it started off as. So that's pretty good because Christianity has become associated with hypocrisy, abuse, war, persecution, and all the rest of it. And I think to restore Christianity to its mystical roots is a great, well, it's a great purification of the world religion. And one can only hope that it hasn't sort of come too late, really, because all religions that have become secular and worldly need to go back to their mystical roots. That is for sure. Anyway, so I was talking to my partner about the work of Thomas Keating, and I expressed my reservations actually about it. I said it sounds like a rather dangerous practice or potentially dangerous practice. Um, but of course, Thomas Keating is very, very, very insistent that this is a very slow process of personal transformation, and it's certainly you can't do it in a fortnight, nor would you want to because that might be somewhat risky depending on your psychological profile and your experiences in past life. Um, and but it's certainly the centering prayer is good. It's right there at the core of the right hand path way of doing things and way of thinking of things because basically during the centering prayer you are declaring your intention of aligning some part of your mind with the divine. And as Thomas Keating says, intentionality is extremely powerful. And indeed, some people say that energy, by which they mean some kind of, I don't know what they mean by it, but energy anyway, follows intentionality in the Western magical tradition, certainly. But this has nothing to do with magic, as it were. But this is a mystical path, and I mean, Ignatian spirituality follows the same path. You're basically declaring yourself open to the Holy Spirit as avatar of great fundamental life-changing, well, fundamental changes. And I was going to start off this presentation by saying that there is some part of our mind which wishes to interact with or align with or unite with our soul. But even that's a Gnostic, of course, concept. But in the Christian concept, certainly to unite with the divine, or become close to the divine, in close proximity to the divine. And that's and this part of oneself that wishes to do this, of course, encounters massive opposition. And there's no doubt about it that you'd be a fool not to realise very quickly that there is huge opposition along the way, along the spiritual path. A very complex opposition at that, and very interlinked opposition. It's not just goodies and baddies. This isn't Star Wars or anything like that. But there is opposition, and I've kind of broken it down into three categories basically. There's the opposition which I call natural, inverted commas. It belongs to the worlds of the demiurge, the finite worlds or the lower worlds, as some people call them. Again, this isn't a mainstream Christian idea. This is a Gnostic idea. But so there's opposition that comes from the lower worlds themselves. Then there's opposition that comes from your deep psychology, from your psychological senses. We'll come on to those in a minute, and from spiritual ambition. And there's also kind of psychic opposition as well, sometimes. Not all the time, but sometimes. And then, of course, well, there's various subcategories of. So there's natural opposition, and then there's human opposition, as it might be, or personal opposition to change. But anyway, never mind about the categories. I'm obsessed with categories, as you probably know. I mean, basically, there are forces in this universe and within you that don't want change, basically. And I've called them the Saturnian forces because these are natural animalistic opposition. This is natural animalistic opposition to change itself. There is an inherent conservatism in the mind, that resists all change, that sees all change as being a threat. And perhaps perhaps there's good reason for that. And all animals regard change in anything as a potential threat and are fearful of change. And indeed, there are some psychic forces in the universe that are mischievous, but not mischievous in a malign sort of way. They're mischievous in a way well, let's say these forces go under the aphorism that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. So they play rough games with people because they think that you need toughening up. It's like throwing your toddler into the swimming pool and make them swim. That's one way of doing it. And it toughens them up. So there's a lot of kind of like that kind of thing going on. These psychic forces are believe in making you strong, and so they scare the bejesus out of you in order to do that. You see, and put you into compromising situations of embarrassment, and generally they put banana skins down of one sort or another, and they play rough games. There's no doubt about that. So of course we're pretty frightened and wary of these forces that bring mischievous change, and because we don't want to be tough. We don't want to be toughened up. We resist all change, find it a threat. So I call these Saturnian forces. They're kind of a leaden, heavy forces that stamp on all innovation and change, and just have an aversion to change as such. And then there are various, so that's one thing that comes from that, from natural forces. And then, of course, what I in spiritual development has an alchemical trajectory, or it is an alchemical process. And the big thing about alchemistry is it damn well takes its own time to make changes. It's not your time, it's not my time, it's not anything's time. It is its own time. And alchemical processes, of course, are rooted in the finite worlds of the demiurge, such that, as I said here, the interplay between the three forces of sulfur, mercury, and salt create various random nodes of inertia. And what do I mean by that? Well, in this world, inertia, like if you've got something on a surface and you want to push it, you've got to overcome the inertia of gravity's effect on keeping the object in stasis. In other words, it's sitting on the table, it's not going anywhere. And you've got to overcome the dampening field of the universe in order to make that object move. And so it is with meditation. There are various, with all practices, you have to overcome the initial inertia, which is very great. But there's also various points of inertia along the way, some of which are quite weak and some of which are very strong. And these points of inertia have to be coped with in order to make any progress. So there's a sort of natural inertia which has to be overcome, which is a sort of blind force. It's not a psychic force. It doesn't have any intelligence. It's not a Saturnian force of leadening down or down. It's just a sort of natural dampening force that has to be overcome. And as I say, alchemy takes its own time to do this, and it just refuses basically because it's rooted in the earth, but it's also rooted in beyond space and time as well. So you get a double whammy because on one hand, it follows Newtonian laws of space, time, motion, energy. And on the other hand, it also is beyond space and time, so it has its own agenda of what goes down. And so you just have to be very patient with alchemy. Very patient. In fact, patience is one of the virtues of an alchemist. In fact, it's one of the contributors to completing an alchemical process is the patience with which the alchemist approaches the whole subject in general, and in particular, a specific operation has to be approached with great patience and fortitude, and this in fact contributes to the success of the operation. So all very well, all that's sort of kind of I suppose, medieval way of looking at things. The modern psychological way of looking at things is psychodynamic, which is based on Freudian analysis and Freudian ideas, is that there exist psychic sensors within the mind, and they just won't let change happen because they're trying to protect you from pain. Because during meditations, various kinds, some things come up from the past to haunt you, and pain can well up. Thomas Keating talks about the evacuation process, where a lot of psychological pain has to be evacuated from the psyche, as it were, or from the mind, the deep mind, in order for spiritual change to occur. But the senses won't allow this because they're trying to protect you from that pain. So you have to fly under the sensors or around them or over them or something like that. And that also takes a long time, because if you smash through these sensors using psychoactive drugs or self-hypnosis, you're going to be in a world of pain. So the process has to be approached in a very cautious way, unless of course you're under the auspices of a guru or a magical order that basically can clear up your mess, clear up the psychic vomit that you might throw up. There's got to be somebody there to take care of you and rub your back and make sure you breathe and all that kind of stuff, and don't go into hysteria. Now, as a subcategory of the senses and of censorship in general, psychic censorship, one might call it, of course, there's spiritual ambition, which I say here feeds spiritual pride, but it could be that spiritual pride feeds spiritual ambition. At any rate, they make an unholy alliance with each other. And of course, in Freudian terms, it's what they call compensation mechanisms. You've been bullied at school, and you grow up with the idea of, I'm going to show the world what I'm made of. I'm going to show the world that I am tough, and that nothing has broken me. It's only toughened me, and I'm still alive. And I got something to prove. And of course, this is kind of rare actually in the spiritual world, but it's very dangerous when people have it, and it leads to cultism and mad stuff. Literally, really insane stuff occurs because it all becomes a big power trip to the individual person seeking spiritual liberation. And the word "seeking" here is a problem, because now we're coming on to what they call a left-hand path. Which means you're trying to kick down that door. You're trying to use some kind of force, some kind of persistence, some kind of a lust to result, some kind of you're doing it to prove a point. You're doing it to satisfy your ambition, and your force the way that you're doing this, the way that you're approaching this, is mirroring the coercive forces of the demiurge. Basically, you've been pushed around, so now you're going to do some pushing around back. And you decided that, there's doors and things, there's obstacles in your way, and you're going to kick them down using the force that mirrors the force of the worlds of the demiurge. But of course, it should be understood, and this is a very important point, that the Holy Spirit has nothing to do with the coercive forces of this universe. It's beyond this universe. It has nothing to do, it doesn't use force, it uses the opposite of force, literally the opposite of force. And basically, in that sense, it will only work with the true will. It only work with the free will. It'll only work with the word declare. I declare myself open to the Holy Spirit, in other words. And if you remember, declare is one of the affirmational words of Homer. I attributed 10 affirmational words to the tree of life, and declare was one of them. And declare means that you declare your intention to be open to the Holy Spirit. Which brings us back to what I said about Thomas Keating, and his main thesis is that you declare yourself open to the Holy Spirit. You're open to the avatar of absolute, fundamental, universal change, and as I said, this is all that you can actually do. The rest is up to the Holy Spirit, and the rest is up to the alchemical processes, as one might say, associated with spiritual change, which, as I said, follow their own agenda. And you are required to be patient. You are required to forbear and forgive, I think, inertia. Because the senses are there to protect you from pain. So they are not to be disrespected. The mischievous forces are trying to make you stronger, but of course they're really just playing around, actually. It's sort of a false strength, really. They're just kicking you around. They're mirroring the forces of coercion in the universe, in this universe. And I'm kind of like blending Gnostic ideas with Orthodox Christian ideas, so I have to be a bit careful here. Because Thomas Keating is an Orthodox Christian, so I don't think there's much Gnosticism about him, and I don't know if he would really buy into all this Gnostic dualism as such. There might be a theological problem for Thomas Keating on some Gnostic aspects. But I think modern Gnosticism is very blended, really, with a lot of orthodoxy and Hindu spiritualism and Buddhism now. So I don't think we're going to sort of come to blows over categories anymore. The categories nowadays are pretty much broken down, as has the hierarchies as well. But it's much more. Spirituality has become democratized. But of course, the Saturnian forces are very, very frightened of this. They don't like democracy. They're afraid of everybody jumping on the same boat because they think the boat might sink. So the Saturnian forces are still into elitism. They still want to only have a few people getting privy of this knowledge and privy of the methods by which you can successfully align yourself or declare yourself aligned to the Holy Spirit. And then, of course, some of the Saturnian forces fear the left-hand path itself. They fear that the mischievousness of man will be brought to bear, and people will choose shortcuts to enlightenment, which will be disastrous. So again, Saturnian forces are being protective of you, as your own personal senses are being protective of you. They don't want any funny business, really. So it's difficult to hate the Saturnian forces. In fact, it's stupid to do so. It's difficult and stupid to hate your senses and to hate the natural inertia of alchemy. And it makes no sense also to actually condemn spiritual ambition and spiritual pride, because even Thomas à Becket had spiritual pride. It happens to everybody, even to Jesus Christ. Temptation was to do with spiritual pride. So if he was tempted by it, you will be tempted by it for sure. And of course, also, there is a natural tendency, I suppose, to think that one has to kick down the door. But the Holy Spirit will not deal with door kicking. There's no door kicking as far as the Holy Spirit is concerned. Only cooperation with that part of you that has declared itself open to the change that the Holy Spirit will bring, and to the transformational forces that the Holy Spirit represents, you see. So I think, is this opposition, again, I think condemning opposition to the Holy Spirit is itself an opposition. It's a manifestation of the forces of opposition to judge and to condemn the natural senses of your mind. The Saturnian forces of this universe, the mischievous forces of this universe. You can't judge judge them, and if you do judge them, I think you're falling into the trap of self opposition, as it were. You're making the job of the Holy Spirit that much more difficult, and you're just delaying things, really. But of course, as Thomas Keating makes out, it takes time. Time is the thing. But I think when you begin your spiritual practice, any spiritual practice, I think all at once you're being patient, but also because you're being patient, time is speeding up. You might say, "Oh, we haven't got time, have we? We might be dead tomorrow." But that's also taken into account. That's factored into the equation. So if you present no opposition to change, then and you're patient about change, then it has the effect of speeding up change. But the more you desire change, the more you slow it down. It's what they call an inverse relationship. So that if it's like pressure being inversely proportional to volume. So you have less volume and you have more pressure. You have more volume, you have less pressure. So it's that kind of a way. It's an inverse relationship between wanting something and having something. The more you want it, the greater delay on having it, and the less you think about it, the more that you will attain what it is that you originally wanted. And that kind of thing comes in. That belongs to the lower worlds, of course, on one hand, but the lower worlds is a fact of life. We can't escape the lower worlds. We are where we are, and it is what it is. And you have to work with what you've got, like the potter's clay. You have to work with the clay that's on the wheel. You can't go around looking for more clay or another kind of clay, because you won't be doing your potting. You won't be spinning your wheel if you're looking for clay to put on your wheel all the time. And you say, "Oh, I don't want this clay. I want another bit of clay." And by the time you've done all that, it'll be like, well, you haven't done anything, have you? Haven't started anything. Which is what I do with music. I just keep on looking for ideas, and I won't work with the idea that I have. I keep looking for other ideas, and so then the idea that I originally had doesn't get manifested, right? It's pretty obvious, really. But you try telling me that. Anyway, so I hope that I've shown that opposition to the spiritual path is actually all part and parcel, perhaps, of the spiritual path. And if it was that easy, everyone would be doing it. But everybody can do it. And that's what Thomas Keating has really shown. He's shown that everybody can have access to esoteric knowledge, so-called, to a method by which you can become aligned to or in close proximity with the divine. It's not the preserve of a few elite Freemasons or Martinists or or Golden Dawn members. And in any case, a lot of them, you see, began to get slipping into spiritual ambition, which didn't do them any good and certainly didn't do any of their students any good. So this is, in that way, the spiritual path it has its dangers, I suppose, but also, and it doesn't have rewards in the sense that we know a reward is. It's not really a reward. It's sort of an openness. You've got to kind of attain openness, and then something will happen, but that something isn't necessarily a consequence of being open, even. So it altogether gets rather complicated. In fact, even though the method itself is laughably simple. I mean, certainly, as far as we're all concerned, never mind the theology and the cosmology and the theory of this. Go back to the method, or find a method which suits you, and achieve it. And I keep on with all these videos now. I keep on coming back to directing you back to the method, the modality, the mode of spiritual alignment, because practice makes perfect, and practice is where it is at. I mean, granted, I think thinking about all this, is good. Thinking about theology and cosmology and is part and parcel of it. But it's got to be balanced with actual practice. Put your money where your mouth is, kind of. Do you know what I mean? But I think it's also good to dream. It's also good to have these theories. I mean, they probably don't mean anything. They probably have no actual reference to anything real at all. They're models, they're theories, they're hypotheses. They may or may not be reflected in the transcendence of the divine. In fact, probably they're not. The transcendent quality of the divine is probably completely beyond any of all these charts and videos that I make and all the books that are written. It's all just sort of like, but there's people dreaming about it, people thinking about it. And in my introspection, my method, you actually go into thinking and deeply about these matters. And it doesn't really matter, as it were, if you're right or wrong, if your theories are right or wrong. You're not trying to prove anything. Basically, you're trying to think about things, without basically wanting any results from what you're thinking about. But that's kind of I'm digressing again a bit here now. But as I said, I always go back to recommending that you find a good method, and perhaps a good teacher, and perhaps a good support network, because you might need a community or a teacher to help you with the forces that will oppose you on your spiritual path. Bearing in mind, of course, that sometimes communities and teachers can often be part of the problem, not part of the solution. So you might be better off being on your own, actually. Because communities can become spiritually ambitious, and so can teachers. Every teacher wants his or her student to shine and be the greatest student, because then it reflects well on them. So you've got all that sort of balderdash to cope with as well. So I mean, be open. A flower opens to the sun, and the sun is the Holy Spirit, and you are the flower, and all you have to do is open. And you would think, that would be the simplest thing to do, but it's also the most difficult thing to do, and one which will require your full attention, and also your full letting go, and you will encounter opposition, and you will encounter inertia, at various points of inertia along the path, which have to be not exactly overcome, but you have to open yourself more in order for that opposition to better dissolve. Anyway, so I leave you with all these thoughts buzzing around. Um, and but I think just suck it and see. Really, just try a method, try it. One of the great mottos of a magical order. I think it was started in Norway. Their simple motto was try, try all this, just try, just do it and see where it takes you. That's basically all that you can do in this circumstance.